My name is Marin Calloway. I'm 63, widowed for over a decade, and I've spent most of my adult life putting others first. I've always been the quiet backbone of my family, the one who made sacrifices nobody noticed, who smiled while exhaustion settled into my bones, and who kept the household afloat when illness, bills, and responsibility demanded it. That morning began like any other in my small Savannah apartment. I was folding laundry and sipping lukewarm coffee when the phone rang. It was unusual for my son, Elijah, and his wife, Naomi, to call in the morning. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. "Mama," Elijah's voice said, unusually tense but excited. "We have a surprise for you." I blinked, unsure whether to expect something trivial or significant. Naomi took over, her tone bright and careful. "We've been planning this for months. You won't believe it." I leaned against the kitchen counter, heart fluttering. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "We want you to come to Europe with us," Naomi said. "All expenses paid. We've booked everything. You leave next week." My mouth went dry. Europe. I had never been outside the United States. The thought alone was thrilling and terrifying. For a lifetime, my world had been Savannah and its surrounding streets, the grocery stores I walked to, the parks where I had once pushed my children on swings, the quiet church where I spent Sundays cleaning pews and lighting candles. Europe was something I had only seen in magazines and travel shows. A dream, yes, but one I never thought possible for someone like me. I tried to laugh, a sound that came out more as a wheeze than humor. "Elijah, Naomi, are you serious? How could you even think of spending that much money on me? You have your own bills, your mortgage, everything." Naomi's voice softened. "Mama, you've sacrificed every single thing for us. This is just a small way to show our gratitude. We want you to experience something wonderful. You deserve it." I felt tears sting my eyes as memories of my late husband, David, and the long years I had spent working double shifts to put Elijah through school washed over me. I thought of my quiet nights after his passing, managing everything alone, my life packed into small routines that never included time for myself. And now, they wanted to take me on a grand adventure, to show me the world I had given up for them. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the travel itinerary Naomi had emailed me. Flight times, hotel reservations, city tours, everything meticulously planned. I traced a finger over the words, Madrid, Spain, my heart pounding. Could I really do this? Could I leave the familiar streets of Savannah behind, step onto an airplane for the first time in my life, and trust that my son and his wife would guide me safely into the unknown? A part of me felt like a young girl again, excitement and fear mingling into something almost dizzying, the reality of adventure, of a world waiting beyond my carefully constructed life, made my chest ache with longing. I'll do it," I whispered finally, my voice trembling. "I'll go." There was a cheer on the other end of the line, Elijah's laughter mixing with Naomi's relieved sigh. They promised to send me packing lists, instructions, and tips for surviving a transatlantic flight. My mind raced with visions of cobblestone streets, cafes filled with strangers, and sunsets I had only ever imagined. As I hung up, I felt a strange combination of exhilaration and apprehension. This was the moment when everything familiar would fade behind me, and a new world would open before my eyes. I took a deep breath, ran my hands over the worn countertop I had polished for years, and felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in my chest. In 1 week, my life would change. The morning of the flight arrived with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. I could hardly eat breakfast. my hands trembling slightly as I poured coffee into my favorite mug. My suitcase, neatly packed the night before, sat by the door like a silent companion, ready for the journey ahead. Elijah and Naomi arrived early, smiles wide, carrying last-minute snacks and reassuring me that everything would be fine. At the airport, the scale of everything made my chest tighten. Endless lines of travelers, the hum of suitcases rolling across polished floors, announcements echoing through the terminal. It was all dizzying. I clutched my boarding pass like a lifeline and let Naomi guide me through check-in, security, and the bustling gate area. Elijah held my arm occasionally, steadying me with a gentle pressure that made me feel both nervous and comforted. Boarding the plane felt like stepping into another world. The narrow aisle, the rows of seats, the faint hum of engines, everything was foreign. Naomi whispered instructions: how to fasten the seatbelt, how to adjust the tray table, how to chew gum to ease the pressure in my ears. I nodded, absorbing every word, feeling like a schoolgirl learning a lesson she had waited a lifetime to hear. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my hand to the window, watching Savannah shrink beneath us. My heart raced. I thought of my small apartment, the familiar streets, and my quiet routines. They felt so far away, and for a moment, a pang of anxiety struck me. I was leaving everything I knew behind, but the clouds outside glowed pink and gold with the morning sun. And I let myself marvel. The world was bigger than I had imagined, more dazzling and alive. Naomi handed me a small bottle of water and a packet of crackers, smiling gently. Here, Mama, you're doing great. Her warmth reminded me of moments when my own mother had cared for me, and for a flicker of time, I felt like a child again, safe, small, and cherished. Elijah, sitting on the other side, didn't speak much, but his presence was steady, a quiet anchor I didn't know I needed. The 8 hours passed in a strange rhythm of turbulence, sleepy glances at the clouds, and timid sips of water. I tried to nap, but my mind was alive with questions. Would the city greet me kindly? Would I know where to go once we landed? Would I be able to trust them? Or would I be lost in a world that had no room for someone like me? Finally, the plane began its descent. Madrid unfolded beneath the window like a painting, red-tiled roofs, narrow streets, and a river winding through the city. The air, crisp and unfamiliar, brushed my face as we disembarked, carrying the scent of the city coffee, bread, and something I couldn't name but recognized as alive. The apartment they had rented was tucked into the vibrant neighborhood of Lavapiés. The walls were warm shades of yellow and orange, and every corner was painted with small, cheerful details: tiles, potted plants, and fabrics that reminded me faintly of home. Naomi guided me up the narrow staircase to the second floor, and as we entered, I felt a strange combination of wonder and unease. "This will be your room, Mama," Naomi said, opening the door to a small but cozy space. The bed was neatly made, the sheets soft under my fingertips. A stack of towels sat on a chair, and a single window framed the street below, bustling with life. I sat on the bed, letting the quiet of the apartment settle around me, trying to absorb everything: the smells, the textures, the sounds. Elijah stood in the corner, smiling faintly. "Tomorrow, we start exploring. You'll see everything we planned." I nodded, unsure whether to believe him entirely, and yet a spark of anticipation warmed my chest. My suitcase sat on the floor, still unpacked, waiting for me to step fully into this new world. For the first time, I realized that I was far from Savannah, far from home, and that every choice I had made to arrive here would define the days to come. The first evening in Madrid felt almost surreal. Naomi insisted I sit while she unpacked the groceries they had brought, arranging delicate slices of jamon and fresh bread on small plates. I hesitated, feeling like a guest in my own life. Every gesture, every carefully placed fork and napkin seemed designed to impress, yet beneath it, I sensed a subtle tension I couldn't quite name. Elijah hovered nearby, offering explanations for everything: how the apartment was chosen for its safety, the neighborhood for its charm, the city for its history. His eyes darted around constantly, almost as if he were measuring my reaction, and the corners of his mouth twitched with a smile that never fully reached his eyes. Naomi, on the other hand, maintained an almost constant cheerfulness, but there was a stiffness to her movements, a precise choreography in the way she poured wine, fluffed the cushions, and asked if I was comfortable. I told myself not to overthink it, letting the warmth of the apartment settle around me, the colors on the walls, the soft linens, even the faint scent of citrus from a candle they had lit. All of it was undeniably luxurious compared to my quiet apartment back home. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the perfection was rehearsed, measured. Later, Elijah suggested a walk through the neighborhood. I followed, clutching my small purse, trying to absorb the unfamiliar streets, the chatter of vendors, and the smell of fresh pastries from corner cafes. Naomi walked beside me, pointing out a mural here, a shop window there, explaining with practiced enthusiasm how each detail was part of the experience they had arranged. Despite the beauty around me, I felt a subtle prickling unease. Their smiles, though bright, sometimes lingered too long or vanished too quickly, leaving a gap I couldn't interpret. Elijah's hand occasionally brushed mine in what I thought was reassurance, yet I caught the faintest flicker of impatience in his eyes when I hesitated to step onto uneven cobblestones. Every compliment from Naomi, every nod from Elijah, felt slightly too polished, too carefully calculated. That night, back at the apartment, they insisted I try the local delicacies they had bought. I sat on the edge of the small bed in my room, tasting each bite, letting the flavors settle in my memory. Naomi hovered nearby, offering more, asking questions about how I liked each dish, while Elijah watched from the corner of the room, a silent presence. I could feel the layers of their attention pressing down on me, caring. Yes, but heavy with expectation, as if my comfort was not enough unless it passed some invisible test. As I washed my hands in the tiny bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, I caught myself thinking of Savannah, my quiet kitchen, the worn countertop, the small rituals that had been entirely my own. Here, every gesture was planned, and yet, I felt strangely adrift. The luxury surrounding me was real, but the warmth I remembered from family, the spontaneous smiles, the unmeasured affection felt just out of reach. That night, I lay in the bed, listening to the faint hum of the city through the window. Streetlights cast long shadows on the walls, and I could hear distant footsteps and murmurs from the apartment below. My heart was full of conflicting feelings: gratitude for being included, wonder at the foreign world, and a creeping anxiety that I couldn't yet name. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the days ahead, the tours, the streets, the experiences they had promised. But the nagging thought lingered beneath the luxury, beneath the care. Was there something they weren't telling me tomorrow? The city would open wider, and so would the layers of truth hidden behind every smile. I woke to the soft gray light of Madrid filtering through the small curtains, expecting the familiar sounds of Naomi bustling in the kitchen or Elijah moving around in the next room. Instead, silence greeted me, A silence so complete it pressed against my ears and made my chest ache. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet brushing against the cool wooden floor. The apartment was empty. My heart skipped. The quiet was wrong. Too wrong. I called out softly, "Elijah, Naomi." My voice trembled, catching in my throat. No answer. I noticed immediately that their bags were gone, everything they had brought with them. The faint scent of Naomi's perfume had vanished. Even the small pile of clothes Elijah had left in the bathroom was gone. I stepped cautiously into the tiny kitchen and froze. There, on the marble countertop, lay a single folded piece of paper, stark against the granite. My name was scrawled across the top in Elijah's careful, familiar handwriting. Hands shaking. I unfolded the note. "Mama, we are sorry, but this is best for everyone. You've lived your life, and now it's time for us to live ours. Please do not look for us. This is final. P.S. Your passport and documents are at the Mexican consulate, Carrera de San Jeronimo, 46. The words felt like knives, twisting in my chest. I sank to a chair, gripping the paper so tightly that my knuckles whitened. My mind refused to process the sentence fully. I read it again, hoping a different arrangement of letters might somehow change the meaning. It didn't. They had left me. Alone. In a foreign city. I sat there for a long while. My body curled into itself, thinking of all the nights I had spent awake, caring for Elijah when he was sick, comforting him after his first heartbreak, guiding him through schoolwork, watching over him as he became the man he is today. I had given everything for him and Naomi, every penny, every hour, every bit of love I had. And now, I was discarded, as if I had been nothing more than a coat hung on a hook until it was no longer useful. My gaze drifted around the apartment, the colorful tiles, the small framed prints on the walls, the little potted plants on the windowsill. Everything seemed to mock me, even the bed I had slept in, neatly made as if they had planned to erase me from existence without leaving a trace. I felt the cold seep into my bones, not just from the unfamiliar draft of the apartment, but from the chilling reality that my family had abandoned me intentionally. I tried to steady myself. I picked up the note again, reading the address over and over. The consulate. At least there was someone I could turn to. Some structure in a city that had so far felt chaotic and indifferent. Slowly, painfully, I rose and gathered my courage. I had to leave the apartment. I had to find help. Walking barefoot through the quiet streets, the unfamiliar sounds of Madrid pressed in on me, voices in a foreign language, the clip-clop of shoes on cobblestones, the distant rumble of a tram. I felt every eye that passed as judgment, as if they could sense my vulnerability. I carried only the paper with the consulate address, my purse with a few pesos and coins, and the fragile hope that someone would hear me, understand me. With every step, memories of Elijah as a child flooded my mind, the small hand I held in mine, the feverish nights I had spent watching over him, the sacrifices I had made silently, the thought that the boy I had loved unconditionally could orchestrate such cruelty with his wife made my stomach churn with disbelief. How could the people I had devoted my life to betray me in this way? By the time I reached the corner cafe near the street, I paused, leaning against the wall, catching my breath. The sun was rising fully now, illuminating the streets in soft gold. My heart pounded not just from walking, but from the realization that my world, the one I had thought secure, had been upended. I had no home, no family to protect me. And yet, I was alive. Somehow, that was enough to take the first shaky steps toward survival. The consulate awaited, a beacon of structure and safety in a city that had suddenly become vast and merciless. with the paper clutched in my hand and the weight of betrayal pressing down. I took a deep breath and started walking, one uncertain step at a time. The first night alone in Madrid felt endless. The apartment, which had seemed cheerful and inviting the day before, now felt cold and alien. Every sound, the distant footsteps in the street, the hum of traffic, even the wind brushing against the shutters made me flinch. I had no money, no food, no way to contact anyone who could help me. My passport was gone, along with everything that connected me to home. I sat on the edge of the bed, hugging my knees to my chest, and tried to remember how I had gotten here. My life had been a series of sacrifices, working double shifts to put Elijah through college, caring for my late husband in his final years, paying for every medical bill and milestone with whatever I could scrape together. I had sold my wedding ring, cleaned offices until my hands were raw, and never once asked for anything in return. And yet, now I was discarded, abandoned in a city whose language I barely knew, with no one to watch over me. Hunger gnawed at my stomach by the second day. I had sipped a few coins worth of water from the faucet, and that was all. My body shivered from the cold and exhaustion, but my mind refused to let me give in to despair. I traced the route to the consulate again and again in my head, trying to memorize the streets. Every unfamiliar corner felt threatening, every passerby a potential threat or a stranger indifferent to my plight. Sleep was fitful, broken by dreams of Elijah as a small boy, feverish and trembling in my arms, and of the countless nights I had spent awake, soothing him, comforting him, and keeping my own fear hidden. And then I thought of Naomi, the smile she had worn so carefully, and the weight of their smiles pressed against me now as I realized what it meant they had left me intentionally, and there was nothing I could do to reason with them. I spent the day wandering the streets near the apartment, my feet raw against the unfamiliar cobblestones. I avoided restaurants and shops, ashamed to beg or ask for help, but hunger made the thought unavoidable. I remembered a small corner cafe I had passed the day before and mustered the courage to approach. The owner, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, shook his head when I tried to explain my situation. His gestures were gentle but firm. I understood too late that he could not help me. By nightfall, I returned to the apartment with a small bottle of water I had begged from a passerby. I sat on the bed and wept quietly. Not just for my situation, but for the realization that a lifetime of giving had left me vulnerable to the people I loved most. I had believed that devotion and sacrifice could protect me, that love would ensure reciprocity. Instead, I was alone, shivering and terrified. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of determination remained. I would make it through the night. I would find the consulate. I would survive these 3 days, even if it meant relying on strangers, on my own wits, and the courage I had buried beneath decades of care for others. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, clinging to the thought like a lifeline, I am still here. I am still alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the pale walls of the small apartment, letting my mind drift back to a lifetime of memories. The quiet of Madrid pressed around me, but inside my head, the years played out in vivid flashes. I remembered holding Elijah in my arms when he had a high fever, rocking him through the night while my own body ached from exhaustion. I had whispered to him that everything would be okay, even when I was terrified. Even when the world outside our small Savannah home felt cruel and unyielding. I thought of David, my late husband, lying in the hospital bed with tubes snaking from his body, the slow rise and fall of his chest, and my hands gripping his as I promised I would manage everything alone. After his death, I had become both mother and father to Elijah, working double shifts, cleaning offices and houses just to pay for his college tuition, his clothes, his textbooks, his dreams. I had pawned my wedding ring, a keepsake from our youth, to cover the cost of his first apartment after graduation. Every sacrifice had been quiet, unnoticed by anyone but me. Memories of birthdays, holidays, and small victories came next. I saw Elijah's face when he walked across the stage at his college graduation, my heart swelling with pride, even though I had been exhausted from days of preparation and worry. I remembered buying the cheapest graduation gift I could afford, just so he would have something to open, something tangible to remind him that I had been there all along, and he had smiled at me then, truly smiled, without hesitation or complaint. But those memories now felt like a bitter contrast to the cold reality I faced. The son I had devoted my life to had left me alone in a foreign city. The woman I had welcomed into our family, Naomi, had not spoken a word to justify it. Everything I had done, the years of labor, the nights spent awake, the money I had earned and saved, the small acts of love seemed suddenly fragile, meaningless in the face of their betrayal. I thought of all the times I had said yes, even when I wanted to say no. All the times I had given my own desires to protect theirs, to make their lives easier, to create a sense of comfort and stability. And now, sitting alone on a foreign bed with only a bottle of water and a crumpled note, I questioned everything. Had my sacrifices truly mattered? Had they taught love, gratitude, or respect? Or had they only trained them to take, to use, to discard? Tears ran down my cheeks as I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering from the cold and the weight of realization. I had spent decades caring, giving, and sacrificing, and yet, here I was, alone, frightened, and vulnerable. And still, despite everything, a quiet voice inside me whispered that I was strong enough to survive. I would endure this. I would find help. I would find a way forward. For the first time in hours, maybe even days, I felt the tiniest spark of resolve. I was no longer just the mother who gave endlessly. I was Marin Calloway. And I would not disappear. Not even in a city so far from home. The morning air in Madrid was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of freshly baked bread and coffee. But my chest still felt heavy with fear and uncertainty. I clutched the folded note from Elijah and Naomi like a lifeline. Stepping carefully through the streets of Lavapiés, my feet ached, my stomach growled, and the unfamiliar language swirling around me made every interaction feel like a test I was bound to fail. After wandering aimlessly for what felt like hours, I spotted the flag of the Mexican consulate fluttering above the entrance of a stately building. My hands trembled as I approached the door. I paused to catch my breath, smoothing my hair and adjusting the folds of my modest coat, as if some semblance of composure could give me courage. Inside, the staff moved efficiently, speaking in Spanish, and for a moment, panic surged. How would I explain my situation? How could I make them understand the betrayal and abandonment I had suffered? A young woman behind the reception desk noticed me hesitating and smiled gently. "Señora, can I help you?" Her accent was soft, but precise. I nodded quickly, fumbling to produce the note from Elijah. I was left here. My son and his wife. They abandoned me. My passport, my documents, they said they are at the consulate. She took the note, scanning it carefully. Her name tag read, Lucia Hernandez, and there was a seriousness in her eyes that balanced kindness. "Do not worry, Señora. We will help you. Please, sit." Her voice carried a calm authority that made my heart lift just a little. Lucia guided me to a small office where she sat across from me and motioned for me to explain everything. The words tumbled out, faster than I expected the arrival, the gifts, the polite attention, and the sudden emptiness, the cruel note, the fear. I recounted each detail, my voice trembling with emotion. But she listened without interrupting, her expression patient and measured. When I finished, Lucia leaned back and nodded. This is serious. Abandoning an adult, especially in a foreign country, is a crime under both Mexican and Spanish law. We will make sure you are safe first. Relief and disbelief collided inside me. After hours alone, wandering the streets and wondering if anyone cared, I finally felt the weight of compassion. Someone cared. She made a few phone calls while I sat quietly, still absorbing the reality that a stranger could offer the protection my own family had denied me. Within the hour, arrangements were made for me to stay at a safe shelter for migrants in vulnerable situations. It wasn't a hotel, but it was clean, secure, and warm. A woman named Amina greeted me, her smile genuine as she showed me to my small room with a simple bed and a window overlooking an inner courtyard. That evening, I rested for the first time in days on a real mattress. The soft linens a gentle reminder that safety could exist even here, in a city I barely knew. A small cup of hot tea and a piece of bread, offered by the staff, felt like a feast. For the first time, I could breathe without constant panic gnawing at my chest. Sitting by the window, I watched the sun set over the rooftops, the warm orange glow illuminating the streets below. My thoughts drifted to Elijah and Naomi, the betrayal still burning like a wound, but mingled now with a fragile sense of hope. If strangers could extend kindness and protection, perhaps survival wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. And in that quiet moment, I made a decision. I would not let this abandonment define me. I would endure, find help, and reclaim what was mine. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of determination, the faintest glimmer that perhaps, even far from home, I could survive and find my way back to safety and strength. Chapter 8. Uncovering the Betrayal. The next morning, Lucia from the consulate called me into her office with a seriousness that made my stomach knot. She gestured for me to sit, then spread a stack of papers across the desk. My heart began to pound as I recognized the headings: contracts, bank statements, property deeds. These documents, she said, pointing to a thick folder, all bear your signature, but none of them were signed with your knowledge or consent. I stared at the papers in disbelief, my hands shaking as I reached for them. Each signature was flawless, a perfect imitation of my own handwriting. My son, Elijah, and Naomi, they had been forging my name for months, perhaps longer. They had been moving money, selling property, and accessing accounts I had thought were secure. Lucia continued calmly, but I could barely follow her words. These transactions involve loans, asset transfers, and even property sales. They were using your identity to secure funds, without informing you. This is fraud. Senora Calloway. I sat back, feeling my chest tighten as the realization sank in. The carefully orchestrated smiles, the lavish attention, the trip of a lifetime, it had all been a cover. They had built a facade of care to distract me while they siphoned my life's work. I remembered every moment from the past weeks, the lavish breakfasts, the tours, Elijah's polite nods, Naomi's gentle instructions, and felt the weight of deception settle over me like a physical blow. I can't believe it, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. My mind raced through all the signs I had ignored, all the subtle hints I had brushed aside as nerves or overthinking. Each gesture of concern had been calculated, a carefully staged performance. Lucia leaned forward, placing her hand gently on the folder. We will help you report this to the authorities, ensure your assets are secured, and begin the process to reclaim what is rightfully yours. But you must understand the extent of what has been done. I nodded numbly, unable to trust my own reactions. They had not only abandoned me in a foreign country, but they had been systematically stealing from me while pretending to love and care for me. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. It was not just about money, it was about trust, about the life I had built and nurtured being manipulated by the people I had given everything to. My mind flashed back to Elijah as a boy, to the late nights comforting him, the sacrifices I had made for his education and well-being. And now, that same boy, grown and married, had orchestrated this betrayal with his wife. I felt a storm of emotions, shock, grief, and an anger I had buried for years, finally surfacing in a raw, hot wave. Lucia handed me a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Sign here, to acknowledge that you are aware of these transactions and authorize us to act on your behalf. My hand shook as I took it, realizing that with a single stroke, I could reclaim control. For the first time in days, a flicker of empowerment ignited inside me. I signed, slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of the betrayal shift into determination. They had underestimated me, thinking that their deceit could go unnoticed, that I would remain passive, lost in fear and confusion. But now, with the documents in my hands, I understood the truth, and with the truth, I found strength. Even far from home, even abandoned, I realized I was not powerless. Their carefully constructed illusion had crumbled, leaving only their crimes exposed. And for the first time, I could imagine the steps I would take to protect myself, to reclaim what was mine, and to ensure that the betrayal would have consequences. The consulate had connected me with a local attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Isabel Morales. Her office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather-bound books, a stark contrast to the small, chaotic apartment I had wandered into days ago. Isabel listened to my story with a quiet intensity, taking notes while I recounted every detail. The trip, the note, the abandoned apartment, and the shocking discovery of the forged documents. You've been extremely patient, Senora Calloway, she said finally, looking up from her notes. Most people in your situation would have panicked entirely. But now, we can act. I nodded, gripping the arms of the chair, feeling a mixture of fear and cautious hope. The magnitude of what Elijah and Naomi had done weighed heavily on me, but Isabel's calm confidence lent a sense of possibility. Over the next hours, we reviewed every document, each loan, each property transfer, each bank withdrawal carefully examined. Isabel explained the steps we would take, securing court orders, freezing accounts, notifying the banks, and filing a formal complaint for identity theft and fraud. She emphasized the importance of accuracy and patience. Rushing could jeopardize the entire case. The reality of facing my own family in court was terrifying. Elijah and Naomi were not just betrayers. They were people I had loved, nurtured, and trusted completely. But Isabel reminded me that the law existed precisely for situations like this, where deception and greed had violated rights and trust. She guided me through the process of reporting the fraud to the police and filing legal documents in both civil and criminal courts. Each step required a courage I hadn't known I possessed. Lucia from the consulate remained a constant support, explaining the local procedures, translating when necessary, and providing reassurance when panic began to rise in my chest. She was patient, meticulous, and unyielding in her commitment to helping me regain control. For the first time in days, I felt that the chaos of my abandonment could be met with structure, with protection, with a plan. We spent hours together, drafting letters, preparing evidence, and mapping out the sequence of legal actions. Isabel's strategy was precise first. Secure my assets, then confront the fraudulent actors, and finally pursue restitution. Every signature, every stamp, every official form brought me closer to reclaiming what had been taken and to the possibility of justice. By the time I left Isabel's office, night had fallen over Madrid. The streets glowed with soft lamplight, but I barely noticed. For the first time since arriving, I felt a quiet strength coursing through me. The fear of betrayal was still there, sharp and jagged, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that I was not powerless. I realized, for the first time, that law and diligence could give me a voice against the people I had trusted most. I could protect my future, safeguard my life's work, and confront the betrayal with authority and precision. Somewhere deep inside, a flame of determination ignited, burning steadily beneath the exhaustion and fear. I was ready. The confrontation would come, and this time, I would not be defenseless. The day of the confrontation arrived with a tension that made my hands tremble as I adjusted my blazer in the lawyer's office. Isabel had meticulously prepared every document, every statement, every bank record. I carried a folder that held the evidence of months of deceit, of trust violated in the cruelest, most calculated way. Elijah and Naomi arrived punctually, their faces carefully neutral, but I recognized the flicker of unease in their eyes as soon as they saw me. For the first time in months, I felt a strange clarity, as if all the fear and confusion I had carried through Madrid had crystallized into a single, unshakable resolve. "Mother," Elijah began, his voice slightly too casual. "We sit down. Both of you," Isabel interjected firmly. Her tone left no room for interruption, and they complied, shifting awkwardly in their seats. I took a deep breath and opened my folder. "I am here because of you," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You left me alone in a foreign city. You forged my name. You took my money and my property, thinking I would never know. This is not negotiation. This is accountability." Naomi's lips parted as if to speak, but she stopped, a flash of guilt crossing her otherwise composed face. Elijah's jaw tightened, and he leaned back, trying to regain his composure. But the evidence before them was irrefutable. Isabel began presenting the documents. One by one, the forged signatures on property transfers, the bank statements showing withdrawals, the contracts for loans they had secured without my consent. Each paper landed on the table like a hammer, the weight of their actions impossible to deny. I watched them shift in their seats, the confident facade they had carried for months crumbling under the reality of exposure. Elijah's fingers tapped nervously against the table. Naomi's hands twisted in her lap, a nervous rhythm betraying her calm exterior. "You believed you could hide this from me," I said, voice rising slightly. "But I have seen everything. I am reclaiming control of my finances, my property, and my life. No one, not even my own son, has the right to decide when I am abandoned or exploited." Silence stretched across the room, broken only by Isabel's soft explanations of the legal steps we would take to secure my assets and ensure restitution. I felt the surge of power and clarity that came from knowing that the law was finally on my side. I was not just a victim. I was an agent of my own protection. Elijah tried to interject, his voice pleading. "Marin, it wasn't like I will not hear excuses," I said, cutting him off. Every decision you made was calculated. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of betrayal has consequences. You will face those consequences." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but I could see through them. The remorse was real in the corners, but the greed and entitlement lingered in their posture, in the way they avoided my gaze. I did not soften. I would not give them the comfort of redemption without accountability. For the first time in months, I felt fully present in my own life. The fear that had shadowed me since stepping off the plane in Madrid had vanished, replaced by a fierce clarity. I was no longer at their mercy. I had a voice, a plan, and the unwavering determination to protect what was mine. When the meeting ended, they left the office in silence, the weight of their actions pressing down in a way they could not disguise. I remained seated, inhaling deeply, letting the adrenaline settle into a quiet strength. I had faced them. I had drawn my boundaries. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly unshakable. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Isabel's office as she handed me the final documents. Each page represented months of work, negotiation, and unyielding determination. I took the stack into my hands, feeling the weight not of paper, but of reclaimed dignity and control. $6,800,000. My money, my assets, everything that had been taken under false pretenses was finally back in my name. I sat down at the polished conference table, letting the figures sink in. The number was staggering, almost surreal. For decades, I had scrimped, saved, and sacrificed, giving everything to Elijah and Naomi, trusting that love and family would guide them. And yet, here I was, finally in possession of not just what I had earned, but the freedom to live on my own terms. Isabel smiled at me, a mixture of pride and relief in her eyes. "It's all secured. Maren, the banks have frozen the accounts. The properties have been restored. You now have full legal control." I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant shadow of betrayal, it was dissipating, replaced by something steadier, stronger. I could feel my pulse slow, the adrenaline from confrontation settling into a quiet, powerful confidence. Leaving the office, I felt the streets of Madrid differently. The city was no longer a place of fear and isolation, but a backdrop to my triumph, a reminder that I had endured and emerged stronger. I thought about the hotel room where I had spent my first nights alone, the empty apartment, the pangs of hunger and exhaustion. Those experiences had carved a resilience into me, shaping the woman who now walked with her head held high, free from dependence and fear. I thought of Elijah and Naomi, the people who had once seemed untouchable in their manipulation. The anger still lingered, but it was tempered by clarity. I was no longer at their mercy. Their betrayal had been exposed, their deceit rendered powerless by the truth. They would face legal consequences, but I did not dwell on vengeance. My focus was forward, on the life I was reclaiming for myself. That afternoon, I visited the first of the properties restored to me. The small house, tucked into a quiet neighborhood, had been neglected while they thought they controlled it. I walked through each room, touching the surfaces, imagining it restored to warmth and life. The garden, overgrown with weeds, was alive with potential. I could see myself planting flowers, tending vegetables, creating a sanctuary not for anyone else, but for me. Next, I met with the bank officers to confirm access to my accounts. Seeing the numbers, the accounts fully restored and accessible, a smile spread across my face I hadn't felt in years. This was more than money. It was autonomy, the ability to make choices without fear, to finally live without hidden agendas dictating my life. Back at my temporary apartment, I opened a notebook and began planning. Trips I had dreamed of, investments for security, a small fund for experiences I had always denied myself. Every plan felt possible. I could finally breathe, finally dream, finally exist on my own terms. That night, I sat by the window, Madrid glittering below, and for the first time in decades, I felt wholly, completely myself. No one could dictate my life, my choices, or my worth. I was free not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. The woman who had given everything for others had finally learned to give for herself. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, a promise to myself, this is my life, my time, my world, and I will live it fully, unapologetically, and with all the love and care I had once reserved only for others. The flight back to Savannah felt strangely heavy. Even though I carried only a small suitcase, the city spread beneath me as the plane descended, familiar streets and sprawling oak trees coming into view, yet everything felt subtly different. I was returning not as the weary, trusting woman who had boarded a plane to Madrid weeks ago, but as someone hardened by betrayal and strengthened by reclaiming what was hers. Stepping off the plane, the warm southern air wrapped around me like an old friend. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of moss, the distant brine of the coast, and the faint aroma of sweet magnolia blooms. It should have been comforting, but a flicker of apprehension surged. My home awaited silent, expectant, a repository of memories both tender and painful. Driving through the streets I had known all my life, I noticed details I had never truly appreciated: the curve of the bridge over the river, the swing set in the park that Elijah had once loved, the front porch of my neighbor's house where I had shared countless conversations. Everything was unchanged, yet I was different. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of giving that had once felt invisible now shimmered with the knowledge that I had endured and emerged stronger. Arriving at my house, I paused at the gate, hand on the latch, allowing myself a moment to remember. This house had seen joy and sorrow in equal measure. It had been witness to Elijah's childhood, to the quiet mornings spent with David before his illness, to nights of anxiety and hope as I navigated the challenges of life alone. And here it stood, a silent sentinel, waiting for me to step back inside. I unlocked the door slowly, the familiar creak of the hinges resonating like a greeting. The living room was exactly as I had left it, yet it felt different now, as if it recognized me as someone reborn. I touched the worn sofa, ran my fingers along the edges of the wooden coffee table, and allowed the memories to wash over me. The laughter, the tears, the quiet evenings spent in reflection, they were all here, stitched into the very walls. I began to walk through each room with deliberate care, taking stock of my surroundings and reclaiming the space as my own. The kitchen, where I had prepared countless meals, no longer felt like a place of obligation, but a canvas for my independence. I opened the windows, letting in the salty breeze from the river and the hum of life outside, reconnecting with the rhythm of my city, my home. In the study, I gathered important documents that had remained untouched: letters from David, photographs of Elijah as a child, and my own personal notes. These tangible remnants of my life reinforced the truth I had come to embrace. I had not lost my history, only the illusions of control my son and his wife had tried to impose. That evening, I stood on the porch with a glass of wine in hand. The sky painted in shades of amber and rose. I watched the neighborhood lights flicker on, the quiet pulse of Savannah settling around me. The house, the memories, The life I had built, they were mine to steward once more. I could arrange my days, my routines, my future without the constant shadow of exploitation. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a life of freedom, one where my choices were guided by my own desires, not by obligation, fear, or manipulation. I thought of the projects I could undertake, the spaces I could restore, and the simple joys I had postponed for the sake of others. The weight of betrayal was still present, but it no longer held me captive. I whispered softly into the evening air, a vow to myself. This is my home, my life, and my peace. No one can take it from me, not even those I once trusted most. And as I closed my eyes, I felt the first true calm I had known in months, ready to begin the next chapter on my own terms. The first morning in my new home felt almost surreal. The sun poured through tall windows, illuminating the soft cream walls and polished hardwood floors. I had chosen this house myself, every detail reflecting the life I wanted, not the one dictated by obligation or sacrifice. The air smelled faintly of freshly painted wood and possibility, a promise I had never allowed myself before. Unpacking was a quiet, deliberate act. Each box revealed remnants of the life I had carried with me. Photographs, journals, favorite books, and small mementos from travels long postponed. I placed each item carefully, arranging my surroundings not for anyone else, but for me. This was the first time in decades that every choice, every decision, belonged entirely to me. Outside, the garden called for attention. The neglected flower beds became a canvas of opportunity. I dug into the rich soil, planting bright marigolds and lavender, letting my hands work the earth as if to expel the weight of the past. With every seed I pressed into the ground, I felt a quiet joy, a sense of creation that was entirely mine. For the first time, I was tending not only to plants but to my own growth, cultivating patience, pride, and a feeling of homecoming that had nothing to do with anyone else. I spent hours exploring hobbies I had long deferred. Painting, which I had abandoned in my youth, returned to me with the same exhilaration and freedom I remembered from long ago afternoons. Music filled the empty rooms as I dusted off my old piano and ran my fingers over the keys. Each note was a small rebellion, a declaration that my life was no longer measured by sacrifice or by the expectations of others. Financial autonomy brought its own quiet satisfaction. Managing my accounts, reviewing investments, and planning my future with care and intention gave me a sense of control I had never known. I could travel, invest in causes I cared about, or simply enjoy the comfort of knowing I could sustain myself without relying on anyone else. Every decision carried weight and consequence, yet it was exhilarating to feel fully responsible for my own destiny. Neighbors stopped by to welcome me. I introduced myself with a calm confidence I had never possessed, sharing small stories about my past, listening to theirs, and feeling the warmth of community that had long been missing from my life. No one here had expectations beyond friendship or kindness. No one demanded anything in return. It was a revelation to experience human connection untainted by obligation, manipulation, or betrayal. Evenings were now my own. I cooked meals I enjoyed, listened to the radio, or sat quietly on the patio watching the sun set over the rooftops. The freedom to simply be, to exist without worry or servitude, became intoxicating. I realized how much of my life had been spent anticipating the needs of others, calculating sacrifices, and suppressing desires in order to serve. Now, each choice was a reflection of my own priorities, my own joy. Sometimes, I thought of Elijah and Naomi, the deception, the betrayal, and the cold calculation that had brought me here. but anger no longer controlled me. It was tempered by clarity and focus. My energy went toward creation, restoration, and the small delights of living for myself. By the end of my first week, I felt transformed. The home, the garden, the piano, the studio. Each piece of my environment mirrored the person I was becoming: independent, self-assured, and unapologetically alive. For the first time in decades, I was not defined by my service to others, but by the strength, resilience, and joy I cultivated for myself. Sitting on the patio that evening, the sun dipping behind the trees, I realized the magnitude of what I had achieved. I had reclaimed more than property or money. I had reclaimed my life. And in that quiet, sun-warmed space, I asked myself for the first time, what does it truly mean to live for myself? The idea came to me quietly one morning as I sipped coffee on the patio, watching the sunlight dance across the garden I had planted with my own hands. My life had been defined by giving, by sacrifice, and by caring for others, but often without recognition, without reciprocity. Now, with my independence secured and my resources restored, I wanted to create a space where giving could be intentional, empowering, and restorative for both me and those who needed it most. I reached out to local community centers, social services, and nonprofit organizations, inquiring about elderly women who had been abandoned or marginalized by their families. Their stories echoed so many of my own experiences: years of dedication met with neglect, love unreciprocated, and lives overlooked. The pain resonated with me deeply, and a quiet fire stirred in my chest. I knew I could help. Together with Isabel and a few trusted contacts, I established a fund specifically for these women. It was not just about money, though financial support was crucial. It was about dignity, opportunity, and connection. The fund would provide safe housing, access to medical care, counseling, and small educational or vocational programs so these women could reclaim agency in their lives. The first recipients of the fund arrived timidly, unsure what to expect. Some hesitated at the door, weighed down by years of neglect and shame. I greeted each woman personally, listening to their stories with attention and empathy, acknowledging the hardships they had endured. I could see, in their eyes, the same mixture of fear and hope I had felt when first abandoned in Madrid. As the days passed, the fund became a place of laughter, learning, and quiet empowerment. Women who had felt invisible began to share their skills, teach each other crafts, cook together, and reclaim a sense of purpose. I watched a former teacher tutor a group of young neighbors, a retired nurse help organize health workshops, and women who had been isolated for years begin to forge friendships that transcended age and circumstance. Helping them, I realized, transformed my own pain into action. Each moment spent guiding, listening, and supporting reinforced my own strength and resilience. The anger and grief that had once weighed so heavily now served as a foundation for meaningful change. In giving, I discovered a new depth to my purpose, one that went beyond financial security or personal revenge. It was about leaving a legacy of compassion and empowerment. Evenings were quieter, but full of reflection. I walked through the small garden, observing the blooms, the sunlight, and the women settling into routines that gave them joy and independence. I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that my suffering had been reframed into something constructive, something that nurtured life rather than merely lamented it. For the first time, I understood that my journey of betrayal and reclamation had not ended with the recovery of assets or autonomy. It had reached its fullest expression in the lives I could touch, the women I could uplift, and the hope I could restore. In helping others, I finally felt the enduring power of purpose and the quiet strength that comes from transforming personal pain into collective healing. The knock on the door was tentative, almost shy, yet it carried a weight I could feel in my chest. I opened it to find Letitia standing there, her eyes red-rimmed and her hair slightly disheveled. She looked smaller than I remembered, and for a brief instant, I felt the motherly instinct to reach out, to comfort. But the memories of betrayal surged forward, tempered by the strength I had built over these past months. "Mama, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I gestured for her to sit, careful not to invite closeness. She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes searching mine for some sign of forgiveness. I took a slow breath and let the silence settle between us. "I know why you're here," I said, finally, keeping my voice calm but firm. "I know what you did. The abandonment, the forged signatures, the money you thought you could take from me. I know it all." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she lowered her gaze. I made a mistake. I see that now. I'm sorry." I nodded slowly, not because I felt absolution, but to acknowledge that she had spoken. "Words are easy, Letitia. Actions define us. Your choices caused real harm, and those consequences remain." She swallowed hard, voice cracking. "I understand. I want to make it right." You want to make it right," I interrupted gently, yet firmly. "But you cannot undo the pain you caused, the trust you shattered. I have spent decades building my life, giving my love and sacrifice, and you broke it. I have reclaimed my independence, my dignity, and my life. That cannot be taken from me again." Letitia's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I saw the weight of guilt and recognition on her face. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I know," I replied, "but intention does not erase consequences, and my life is no longer yours to manipulate or control. I can allow you to speak, to explain, but I am not offering forgiveness. Not yet. If ever, I am offering boundaries." She nodded, a silent understanding. And for the first time, I felt the dynamic between us shift. I was no longer the daughter's caretaker, her safety net, or her source of endless resources. I was my own person, fully aware of my rights and my strength. "I will not forget," I added softly, "but I will not let this define my remaining years. I have reclaimed my life. Letitia, that is what matters now." She rose slowly, lingering at the threshold, as if hoping for more. I did not move. "Go home, Letitia. Reflect on what you've done. Your path forward is yours, but I will no longer be entangled in your decisions." She nodded, lingering for a heartbeat, then left quietly. The door closed behind her, and I stood in the silence of my living room, breathing deeply. I had faced the person who had caused me the deepest pain and had maintained my independence. I had spoken my truth, asserted my boundaries, and protected my life. For the first time in months, I felt unshakable. Forgiveness might come someday, or it might not, but justice, and the reclamation of my autonomy, was more than enough. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of my new home, spilling golden light across the room for the first time in decades. I woke without obligation, pressing on my chest, without the weight of expectations or betrayal lingering in every corner. I stretched slowly, savoring the quiet and the stillness, and allowed myself a smile that felt unforced and true. I moved through the house deliberately, touching the walls, the furniture, the small objects that now belonged entirely to me. Every decision had been mine to make, from the color of the walls to the plants in the garden. Even the kitchen, once a place of endless duty, had become a space of pleasure. I brewed coffee in my favorite French press, the aroma filling the room like a warm embrace, and sat by the window watching the world wake outside. I had spent so much of my life giving to others, prioritizing their needs, their comfort, and their ambitions above my own. Now, each moment of this morning was mine. I lingered over breakfast, savoring a simple meal without rush or distraction, and felt the quiet power of autonomy settle into my bones. Later, I ventured outside, tending the garden with careful hands. The marigolds, lavender, and newly planted roses responded to my attention, growing tall and vibrant. As I worked, I realized that tending to life, nurturing it with my own choices, was an act of reclamation. It was a statement I had endured, I had survived, and I was thriving. The day continued with small adventures. I visited a local bookstore, lingering among the shelves, choosing titles that interested me, and speaking with the staff who treated me as a valued customer, rather than someone to be managed or appeased. I explored the cafe down the street, enjoying the comfort of being in a place where I could simply exist, unnoticed but content. Evenings were no longer defined by preparation for others. I cooked dinner for myself, poured a glass of wine, and listened to music that made me move, made me feel alive. I danced quietly in the kitchen, alone, and felt the liberation of living fully in my own skin. Every movement, every choice, reinforced the truth I had fought so hard to reclaim. My life was mine to live. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the theft, the abandonment. Each memory still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer held power over me. The independence I had fought for, the dignity I had reclaimed, and the life I had begun to rebuild were shields against the pain of the past. As night fell, I sat on the porch, the warm glow of the setting sun painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The garden, the house, and the quiet street became a sanctuary where I could finally celebrate the life I had earned. I raised my glass in a silent toast, honoring not only the victories of the past weeks, but the freedom that stretched endlessly before me. For the first time in decades, I was fully myself, unbound, unburdened, and unapologetically alive. I had reclaimed my life, and with it, the joy, the peace, and the limitless possibility of living for myself. I stood in the sunlit garden, the blooms I had planted swaying gently in the breeze, and thought of all the women whose lives I had touched through the support fund. Each smile, each story of resilience reminded me of the strength we all carried, often hidden beneath years of sacrifice and neglect. I reflected on my own journey from the woman abandoned in a foreign city, stripped of trust and security, to the woman who had reclaimed her life, her assets, and her dignity. The betrayal, the fear, and the hardships no longer defined me. They had shaped the depth of my resilience, the clarity of my boundaries, and the power of my independence. The fund had become more than assistance. It was a testament to what can rise from pain. The women I had helped inspired me as much as I inspired them. A shared circle of empowerment that extended beyond any single act of generosity. I breathed deeply, feeling the quiet pride and peace that came from living deliberately, with intention and integrity. My life was no longer dictated by others' needs or deception. I had reclaimed my autonomy, created a legacy of strength, and found the courage to live fully for myself. As the sun dipped low, I whispered to the wind, honoring both the life I had survived and the one I had built complete, empowered, and undeniably mine.